Today's guest is a returning guest. I interviewed Mark Monchek about 12 months ago. We put the podcast out. He's the author of a book called The Culture of Opportunity, about how to grow your business in the age of opportunity. And Mark has got a fascinating take on business and how business should be. And I don't want to spoil it too much by giving away what he's talking about, but he does have a very refreshing and I think challenging way of looking at how businesses need to be in the current climate and going forward, and the shift that that is going to require of all of us as leaders in the businesses going forward that are going to thrive in the coming years. So it really is a different take. We also talk about the use of psychedelics in business and how that has evolved over the years and the positive impact that that can have. And he talks quite expertly about that topic. So I really encourage you to listen. This is different. This is a different way of thinking. There's a different way of approaching. And Mark has got a very, very unique take on business today that I love listening to. I know Mark quite well. I find him the most fascinating person to have a conversation with. So I really do encourage you to listen to the very interesting Mark Monchek. Mark, well, welcome back. It's nice to see you. It's almost 12 months since we published the last interview that we did was very much around your book, The Culture of Opportunity. How have you been since we last spoke?
Well, John, I think the quote by Charles Dickens, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wonder, it was the age of incredulity. I'm paraphrasing. So me personally, my life has been incredibly blessed because as I mentioned to you before we got on the air, that I've been attracting somewhat I would call next level consciousness practitioners, people who have the ability to shift the way we think, the way we believe, the way we act in faster and more profound ways than I ever even imagined was possible. So the work that we do at Opportunity Lab, our mission is to support business growth through expanding consciousness, is really around shifting the consciousness of our entrepreneurs, of the business leaders we work with, to help them develop the businesses that they truly are proud of and will end up at the end of their life feeling it was work well done.
Okay, and I want to come back to that, but I do think that from my experience of working with clients, I do think that the last 12 months have been really interesting. I think it's been challenging in some ways, but we have been kind of coming out of COVID. We have been, adjusting to what does the whole kind of hybrid workplace, all of that sort of stuff. There's been a huge challenge with talent for organizations. There's also, if you look at from the technology perspective, some of these large, companies that the technology companies have been facing, making people redundant for the first time in their lives. What's your experience of the last 12 months? How have you seen it? Because I just think it's been a really fascinating time.
Yes. So, if we look back to March of 2020, right? So it's been an arc of radical change. And then there've been points where we thought, oh, I think maybe now we have the new normal. And every time we thought we had the new normal, we were wrong. So yeah. I believe we're in an age of radical disruption when the things that we thought we could count on are no longer real. And I think we're falling back into person's real understanding of why they're here on Earth. What are they meant to do? And the companies that are here, what are they meant to do? So they released a couple of surveys in the United States over the last couple of days about brands and which were the most recognizable and the most trusted brands. And what you see is a tremendous divergence between what the Gen Z population, the generation, thinks about brands and what millennials Gen X, and baby boomers too, right? So Gen Z, which is a population that is, in their early 20s to mid 20s and, becoming a greater part of the workforce, has the greatest level of distrust of brands, whatsoever, and are really looking at companies for what they do, how they do it, why they do it, and beyond the way we think of brands, which is often an image in the marketplace, not the reality behind that image.
That's fascinating. And it's also interesting because I've been doing some reading in the last period of time, which very much connected to what you've been saying, whereas, about we're working through a period of time where we've got more generations work in the workplace at the same time. So you've got all from the baby boomers down or up, whatever way you want to put it, and the challenge that brings to the organizations. But when you say that, what challenge is that making to the organizations, and what challenge is that making to the leaders of those organizations?
Well, the biggest shift that I think so many business owners, business leaders, entrepreneurs struggle with is the idea that they no longer control the time and attention of their employees the way they thought they did before COVID, right? So when COVID happened, there were 75% of Fortune 500 CEOs felt very, very doubtful and negative that they were going to be able to move their people who could be remote. They were very pessimistic about remote work. If you then, we polled those people 6 months later, let's say toward the middle or end of 2020, those same 70% now flipped, and they were very optimistic, saying, well, I was shocked that my employees are more productive than ever, right? And why? Because they saw a reality that was there before that they didn't see, because their belief was, I pay you, so you should be in the physical place doing the thing I'm expecting you to do when you do it, because you're my employee. Now, suddenly, people are working at all hours, and they are doing the things during the day that they need to do, going to a doctor's appointment, helping their kid get through remote schooling, and so forth. So we opened up to this, wow, maybe people are able to work different hours in different places in different ways. Somehow, suddenly, these same CEOs at the beginning of 2022 said, you know what, COVID is sort of over, so we want you back in the workplace. So the CEO of David Solomon, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, ordered his people to be back in the workplace March of 2022. And he thought, well, I'm the CEO of Goldman Sachs. Of course you're going to come in. Well, guess what? 50% of people did not come in, right? So then we had this probably 2-year period where there was a war for talent. Oh my, we can't get talent. We have to pay more. We'll allow people to work remotely. We'll do whatever we can. And particularly for people who are in service industries. Then suddenly within a 6-month period, tech companies who are hiring people like crazy, buying billiard tables, massage tables, all kinds of things. Suddenly they're laying off massive numbers of people, right? So part of it was people were going back to the physical stores, which we said that they weren't going to do, and not having the trajectory of online shopping and interaction as much as we thought they were going to do, right? Then in November of last year, we heard this thing about ChatGPT, AI, which has been around for decades, but ChatGPT came out as a public offering, or free to the public, probably around February of this year. And that was a massive game changer. And it's still playing out of what that's going to mean. So the layoffs that were happening in tech are now accelerated because there are some companies like JP Morgan Chase that said, we're putting a hold on any positions that we think could be done by AI, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've tried and played around with ChatGPT. We have done a lot of that, and we're working very much with it, but understanding the realities and the dangers of it. So that is changing the game in another way, okay? So let's go back to the workplace for a minute. So what we tell our clients is, yes, it absolutely makes sense, and there's a lot of data that things happen in the workplace that do not happen at home. On the other hand, the flexibility of people being able to work at home and in the workplace and at different hours is also extremely important, right? However, a lot of leaders, they can't parse the subtlety and the need for flexibility and the need for continuing change. So they want it, well, we want you in the office 4 days a week or 3 days a week on a certain day and a certain, well, that is not the world we live in now. It may have been the world we thought we lived in before COVID. It's not the way we live in now. So the companies that I think are becoming the most successful are the most nimble, the most resilient, and listening to their employees as partners. I'm using the word partners, not financial partners, but work partners. So the idea that you're an employee and that gives you, the employer, a certain right, I think that is gone for many, many job categories. Maybe not gone in a warehouse or a manufacturing floor where you physically have to be in a place at a particular time, but for white collar jobs and knowledge workers, I think it's much more of a partnership that has to continually be re-upped and recreated.
Yeah, and I think that for many leaders, the problem is, because I agree with everything you say, and I think that organizations are struggling hugely with this, and I think part of it is because there is an old mindset that I need to have something that fits in a box, right? We need to have a structure and boundaries, and it's got to be neat and tidy, a bit like you turned up for work 5 days a week, 9 to 5, and okay, that was gone. But we have to have a version of that, and I don't think we can actually have a version of that. And there's the ability to flex within it and to understand that when people come into work, that we're doing work that is valuable, because there's no point in just coming in and sitting at a machine and doing exactly what you could do in your living room or your bedroom or whatever it might be. So I think that that is the shift. But if I can go to what you were talking about there in terms of the conscious, you use the term conscious business, right? Can I ask you just to explain exactly what do you mean by conscious business?
Well, let me start with the word conscious, okay, before we get into business.
Yeah.
So this sounds like a very, very, ethereal word, a very abstract word. It's like, oh, it's so out there. Conscious means aware. Consciousness means awareness, okay? So a conscious business is a business that is aware of where it stands in the world, is aware of its responsibility to all of the multi-stakeholders by which it takes and gives resources to. So in the world of Milton Friedman, the economist from the University of Chicago, the only purpose of a business was to make profit, and everything else was irrelevant. Well, that is not the world we live in, and the world that was created by that is a world that is unsustainable, with massive climate change, massive unsustainability in all parts of the world. So to me, conscious business is aware that a business, let's say take my business, Opportunity Lab, we get resources from the educational system that educates the people that work for us, the roads that we travel on, the public transportation that we travel on, the air that we breathe, the healthcare system that allows us to be healthy or get healthy when we get sick. So we believe in a multi-stakeholder responsibility. That is a conscious business. We're aware of the fact that we allowed to be in business only because these things happened for us. And we believe it's a responsibility to give back to those stakeholders, not just our investors and our partners, but our employees, the communities we do business in, the natural world, the customers and the suppliers, all of those people in the supply chain.
So if you're to go back to Friedman's definition of the purpose of business to make a profit, right? What would you actually say the purpose of the business today is?
Well, to me, the purpose of a conscious business is to make a contribution to the world that makes it a better place, fairer, more sustainable, more equitable, and serves a need that people and the planet have. Mm-hmm. That's my definition. I'm not saying it's the only definition. I'm not arguing that this is the only way you could be in business, but this is the way I think will create a sustainable world, which we currently do not have.
Okay, so would profit then be one of the enablers to make that happen? Because the profit allows you to stay there and continue to do it.
To me, John, profit is the result of doing those things well. So I think profit is absolutely necessary because you want money to reinvest. You want money to give to those people, not just the only thing you're giving to them, but you want people need money because money is a way that we get the things we need in the world. But if profit comes at the cost of destroying the environment, of exploiting employees, of lying to customers, of making customers unhappy, right? That is a profit that is not going to circulate. It's going to stop. And you see companies that have been amazingly, profitable now are no longer profitable. A recent movie, I don't know if you remember the BlackBerry. So the BlackBerry was the first truly global mobile phone, right? Before the iPhone, before Nokia. There's a great movie out called BlackBerry, and it's about the rise and fall of Research in Motion, which was the Canadian company that designed, built, and then imploded the BlackBerry. That is an amazing lesson of a company that started out for good. They became so profit-centered that they blew themselves up in the course of about 10 years.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary story, isn't it? But when you talk about the shared success, what I assume what you mean by that is that all of the stakeholders that are connected to the business are kind of sharing in that success, and that success may look very different to the different stakeholders. But when you also talk about the shared responsibility, just explain what you mean about the shared responsibility. Is that the shared responsibility of all of the stakeholders?
Well, I'm going to give you two examples. One is our company, Opportunity Lab, and the other is a brand that was the #1 most trusted brand in one of the surveys, which is Patagonia, right? Which is a company that makes outdoor clothing and equipment. So our company, Opportunity Lab, shared success is, for example, we just set up a new 401k retirement plan. And when we set it up, me, who's the sole owner of the company, in terms of equity, we did it collaboratively with the four of us. We looked at different plans. We looked at how much that I want to put in guaranteed to all the employees. We looked at how long it took to be vested. So this was all done with full transparency of the finances of the company, which every employee gets to see how we spend our money. So when we get successful with our clients, we decide together. I'm the final decision maker, but everybody has a voice of how we're going to use those profits, right? And we want to make sure that those profits come from the success of our clients, and that the people who supply to us, let's say some of the partners who give services to us, also feel like they've been properly rewarded. So we get feedback, we do client surveys, we get feedback from our partners, and that's our way of thinking about shared success and shared responsibilities. We all have responsibility for not only the clients we serve, but all the entire impact that we have in the world.
Right. Okay. All right. Okay. Now I get that. I want to shift gears here a little bit, because you and I have previously discussed, and when we've met and had conversations about the use of psychedelics in business, and how major kind of entrepreneurs are leaning into this. And and for some people that's kind of, oh wow, that's a bit weird, that's a bit strange, right? But maybe can you talk to that, and what can you elaborate on how that is being used and how that is being managed? And where's the tipping point of it going from being useful and beneficial to being dangerous?
John, you asked such great questions, and hopefully I can answer them succinctly enough so that we can have this podcast in the time frame you set out to do. Okay. So I want to, for our audience, I don't want you audience to think we made this tremendous leap and we jarred you from the discussion about conscious business into psychedelics, because there is a absolute segue there. So the reason why psychedelics is really, really being used by entrepreneurs, and it has been, by the way, for many, many decades, and I'll go back to that in a minute, is because when you are in a psychedelic experience, you understand the connectedness of all life. You begin to see in a very visceral level how we are dependent on the water, the air, the mountains, the soil, the plants. That's an experience that I've had in using a variety of different psychedelics. I went to Peru in 2019, and when I had my first ayahuasca experience, which by the way is legal in Peru, I understood, John, and this is a shocking thing, people will think I'm out of my mind maybe, but that plants are sentient beings, and that plants, the ayahuasca plant sends you very specific messages in your own language that are very clearly understandable to you. And So I had many, many messages during my ayahuasca journeys. And one of the most central ones is that I am enough. I am good enough just as a human being. I don't have to prove myself in the world. And that by feeling good enough, that allows me to make my best contribution to the world from a place of safety and love, rather than a place of having to prove myself every day, as my parents did for the experiences that they had. Okay, so let's wonder, why do you think that Silicon Valley, from its inception in the 50s, became one of the, if not the most creative business environment on the planet? Why Silicon Valley? Why not New York City? Why not I don't know, Dallas, Texas? Why not Los Angeles, California? Well, one of the reasons is that psychedelics have been used in Silicon Valley from the early days of the 1950s. Okay, companies like Ampex, that made the tape decks that we used to use back in those days, were using psychedelics on retreats. Steve Jobs had a very long history using psychedelics, right? So now Silicon Valley has gone back to using more in microdosing, but even people doing macrodosing. And because psychedelics, they minimize what's called your default mode network, which is the part of your brain that censors, criticizes, and limits you. And that is an important part of your brain when you're driving a car, when you're doing things that need to be done in a very precise way. But it limits you when you're looking at an imagination of something that's never happened before. So, they used to ask Steve Jobs why he didn't do focus groups. And he said, because people don't know what they need, because they don't know that it even exists. So he created things that people didn't even know could possibly exist. And he was really, really spurred on, to some extent, not by a total extent, by psychedelics, but he also, when he went to Reed College, right, he was a drop in. When he realized how expensive Reed College was, and his parents were adoptive parents, he decided this was way too much for them, so he dropped out. Didn't think he needed a degree, which he didn't, and he dropped in and he took calligraphy, right? He took courses that were not traditional courses that an entrepreneur would take, because Steve Jobs had a very, very holistic mind, and he was able to see things outside of the boxes that we tend to put people in traditional education.
Okay, so how have they used them, and how have they used them, and what way is it done? That is within the law, within reason, within safety, all of that.
Okay, so when we're talking about psychedelics, that is a very, very large umbrella of different types of medicines. Okay, so you've got the natural plant medicines, and when people think of that, ayahuasca, which grows in the Amazon basin, is one. Psilocybin, which you've heard about as magic mushrooms, is another major one. There are quite a few other ones. So those are the two that people talk about the most. The synthetics are LSD, ketamine, which, by the way, is the only legal psychedelic in every state in the United States. It was originally developed in the Vietnam War as an analgesic and an anesthetic, and still used as an anesthetic for animals and children. So, and then there is macrodosing, where you have a full-blown experience, which kind of opens up your consciousness in a big way. And then there's the microdosing, which is a much more subtle, much more precise experience, which happens over time. Okay, so back in the 1950s and 1960s and 70s, right, psychedelics were used in mental health, right? Bill Wilson, right, Bill W., who was the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, so the co-founder, was using LSD for treating alcohol addiction. There were tens of thousands of studies of all different types of psychedelics, and they were used in a very controlled way. But when Richard Nixon came to office in the war on crime, he decided he was going to take psychedelics and use it as a reason why our society, in the psychedelic drug, sex, and rock and roll 60s and 70s was out of control. Then you had Timothy Leary, who was in some ways an irresponsible Pied Piper of psychedelics. He was a professor at Harvard. He was studying with Richard Alpert, who was later became Ram Dass, legally studying psychedelics at Harvard. But when they used it on undergraduates, which was not allowed by the university, that brought this whole chain of events. So when he said, drop tune in, drop out, and turn on, tune in, and drop out.
Right.
That was a very irresponsible way to think about psychedelics, because psychedelics are very powerful medicines. And in my mind, they should not be used recreationally. They should be used understanding what they are meant to do and doing it in a very guided, precise way with people who know how to do it in a way that keeps you safe. So yes, there are absolutely dangers and cautions about psychedelics. However, the dangers of bad trips and people having serious problems with psychedelics is so far less than alcohol, than opioids.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Than even cigarettes. So I think the dangers of psychedelics have been overblown, because for the most part, they are not addictive. You have an experience, and you don't want to have one the next day. You might not ever want to have one. But let's look at the one that is really coming closest to being accepted and legalized in the United States, which is MDMA, which is in the lab, right? So MDMA used to be called ecstasy or Molly, has been studied by the FDA through an organization called MAPS, which is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, using psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy using MDMA for veterans who have severe cases of PTSD not treated by traditional medications. 75 to 80% of these veterans no longer have the diagnosis of PTSD after they've gone through the protocols put through by MAPS. This is an amazing breakthrough, John, an amazing breakthrough. 22 veterans kill themselves of suicide every day in the United States.
I know.
Many of them because of depression and PTSD, right? So MDMA, which is been studied over and over, thousands of studies, and it is shown safe, used with psychotherapy as an overall treatment plan, right? So we have a breakthrough in mental health, as well as a breakthrough in spiritual awakening, however, done with caution and with care.
So if company says, okay, that sounds really interesting, and I understand the logic of what you're saying, because there is compelling logic to what you're saying, how do I actually go about doing that in a way that is safe for my people, that is safe for me, that is safe for the organization?
Well, that's a very important and sensitive topic, because, as I mentioned earlier, in the United States, the only psychedelic that is legal in all 50 states is ketamine, okay? I am working with a clinic in New York called Nushama Psychedelic Wellness Center. They do very, very curated, specific ketamine sessions for people with mental health conditions, and also for some other situations, which I can talk to somebody about. And again, it's 100% legal. They have a medical staff. You have an intake. You have a whole set of understanding why you're doing it and what you're going to get out of it and how to make sure you get fully supported, right? There are 2 states in which psilocybin is legal, which is Oregon and Colorado, and also in the city of San Francisco and California. Those states are now rolling out the regulations, because it's one thing to make it legal, it's another thing to actually have the dispensaries, the protocols of inspection and all of that. So you could go to one of those 2 states. It is legal in many other countries, in Peru, Costa Rica. So there are many other countries where companies go on retreats where they legally can use psychedelics under the care of trained and experienced guides. And then there are people who do it underground, who do it safely, but without necessarily the benefit of having it be legal. So,
okay. I mean, it is something that you're beginning to see more and more written about. And it's a topic that you're seeing that is getting much more headline and less kind of being seen as underground. So I think that this is something that is going to really kind of grow. Looping back to this, because these are all connected. They're not separate things. If you're going back to what we were saying earlier on about organizations needing to think and behave in a different way and to have a more holistic kind of view of the world, how do organizations, manage and kind of really, if you like, compete in this war for talent to retain the people that they want to retain, to retain and develop future talent? How must they be, and what must they do in order to become more conscious of those individuals and their growth and their evolution?
Okay, let me go back to the word consciousness and conscious business to make sure, because it's a relatively new concept to people and it can seem very complex and a bit overwhelming. And I'll make sure we keep it clear and as simple. And I say simple, I don't mean simplistic, but simple to understand the basics, right? So again, consciousness is a synonym for awareness. So the awareness, underneath the awareness, John, is a set of beliefs. And those set of beliefs, some of them are conscious and some of them are unconscious. So the beliefs for a conscious company are, we all have a right to be respected, that we want to make sure we respect all the diverse opinions, the diverse cultures, religions, sexual preferences, and various other ways people show up in the world, that we believe collaboration and co-creation is an important value. We believe in respecting what our customers need, what they want, and giving them the best possible service we can. We respect our partners, our investors, and our shareholders, and make sure we know what they need. So these are conscious business values. Now, underneath these values, sometimes people have competing beliefs where what they say they want to do, they don't necessarily do, right? So a person might say, yeah, I believe in diversity. I believe in having talent come from wherever it needs to come from. However, when they get in a room with somebody they're interviewing, they're looking unconsciously for somebody that thinks and acts like themselves. And hence, they end up with teams that are more like them than not like them. And how do you change that? Well, we look for ways to get people to be more conscious and understand the unconscious beliefs that might not be aligned with their conscious values. And that's a process that we've developed at Opportunity Lab. It's part of my book, Culture of Opportunity, How to Grow Your Business in an Age of Disruption. We have many tools of awareness that are not psychedelic, that are legal, but have similar ways to shift your way that your brain thinks to open up to areas that you haven't previously been open to.
That's fascinating. Mark, it's always fascinating to have these conversations with you. I love these conversations. I always walk away with curiosity, questioning myself, questioning things that we do, and I love that. I love that you do that, and I do think that, you know, if for anybody that hasn't read your book, The Culture of Opportunity, I highly recommend it. I think it's a very eye-opening and reflective book. So I think that I'd highly recommend it. Where can people get in touch with you and find out more about the work that you're doing?
Yeah, we have a really robust website, John. It's opplab, opplab.com. We have a lot of the podcast episodes, the ones that I've done with you and many other ones on there. We've got a newsletter that we publish once a month, and we have a lot of events and various free resources. So opplab.com, if you want to contact me directly through my staff, discover@opplab.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. So there's a multitude of ways you can do that.
Well, I'd highly recommend anyone to go to your website, because there is a ton of resources on your website, and it really is spectacular. Mark, thank you so much for being a guest again. I know that we're going to come back and have further conversations, and I know we're going to get a great response to this one. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate your brilliant interviewing. It's been fun.
Great. Thank you.